Welcome back, everyone. So this is something very different. We've worked together for a while to try and organise this session, which we're going to run until lunch. So, has everyone received a copy of the scenario? If not, just pop your hand up and Igor can run out and give you one. So if you just quickly read that while I'm rabbiting on, you'll get a flavour for what we're going to do. So the idea is to expose us, a mostly virology audience, right, of different career stages, to the discussions that take place outside academia during the early days of a pandemic, right? And I think that reflects on all of our experiences in the last pandemic. And that, hopefully the idea is to kind of inform us on the policy interface, the role of communication and trust, make us think a little bit more interdisciplinarily about communication in that kind of environment, and then to reflect on our own roles as scientists during a crisis. So, so together with the co-chairs, so there's Hayley and James there. We've just organised 4 excellent speakers and panelists who are going to run through their specialties first and give you a bit of an introduction into what we're going to talk about. And then what we're going to do after they've each given a sort of 5-minute introduction is we're going to split into groups. So what I suggest is that we just split the room into 4, right? So if we say these sort of tables here, that's Group A, the back quarter is Group B, Group C, and then Group D here. So if A comes with David and I, and we'll find a breakout area. Group B goes with Fiona and Paul, and they find their breakout area.
That's going to be up there.
Yeah, Group A, we're going to go through there. So we'll go at that area. And Carrie is online. So Group C and Hayley are going to stay in here. And then Josephine with James, they're also going to go out that way for a breakout area. So there'll be a half-an-hour discussion after we've managed to herd everyone into those sort of areas. Half-hour discussion where you can follow up with your respective panelists on some of the areas they've highlighted, and based on this scenario, obviously, that we've introduced. And then, I mean, the idea, we're not going to mix the groups or do anything like try and put people from one group into another group. The idea is just give you a flavour, and then David, Fiona, and Josephine are here for the rest of the day, so you can go and speak to them in the coffee breaks and to also get an overview. And then we're going to regather in here, and then each of the groups is going to feed back, and we're going to have some time for Q&A with the panelists, and then we'll just have some final comments before lunch. So it's meant to be fun, but also serious, right? To get a real introduction to some different aspects of communication. James and Hayley and I thought this is a really important thing to do for this particular community at this time. So if I can invite David up first to give his introduction. So you can wear this if you want. Yeah. It's got a little magnet, so you can marvelous.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Hello. Yes, I'm David Schley. I'm Deputy Director at Sense About Science. Although before that, I was a researcher. I've been a researcher and lecturer. I also spent a bit of time at the Purbright Institute, but as a mathematician modelling and doing epidemiology rather than what you do. So Sense About Science, we're an independent charity. We champion the public interest in sound science and evidence. So for us, that means, that really important decisions for society, policies are based on the best available evidence that is open for people to see, and also that the public have a right to good information and access to evidence and source of information. So one of the things we really clearly ask people to do is to ask for evidence, and that can be from anything from medical advice you're given to, recommendations for a shampoo. So what do? We do a lot of work around transparency of evidence. So you may have seen our transparency ratings covered in the media about where we're currently rating government policies on how transparent they are about the evidence they use. Our What Counts inquiry, I think, is very relevant today. That was an inquiry into how evidence was used by government and how that was shared. And I think one of the key findings there was how unhelpful an authoritarian approach is as opposed to an authoritative approach. And hopefully it's that authoritative, that expertise, that's a role that you can bring. So happy to talk about that more. But we also work a lot about science being transparent as well. So for example, the All Trials campaign we coordinated sought to eliminate publication bias from medical research. And as hopefully many of you are aware, as of next year, it becomes regulation that all clinical trials in the UK, you have to register them and you have to report them, and it's going to be illegal not to do so. And that's exactly that point, because we've had decades of, negative results not being published, skewing the evidence-based research. So that's something, for that transparency, something we delivered. It's law in the UK, but there's similarly stuff for the EMA and FDA in the US. We do a lot of work with research on public engagement partnerships, and I think that's probably what I'll be talking with you today. And that's anything from vaccines to GMOs to AI, helping researchers work with the public, having meaningful engagement. What does it actually mean to work with the public? For us, we'd like to take a public-led, expert-fed approach. It's what do the public actually want to know? And we provide training for that. We also run Voice of Young Science workshops. So for all the ECRs in here, I recommend you sign up for that. We've got free workshops and loads of resources that help think about how you can engage with the media, how you can engage with the public, and how you can engage with policymakers. On that note, we run Evidence Week in Parliament, which we've established with Post and the House of Commons Libraries and various other partners. It's a flagship event. It's a real great opportunity for researchers to speak directly to policymakers about stuff that matters. So I would say, if your work is at a stage where you think it should be influencing policy, if it's not yours but something in your lab, then do come and talk to me. We have a few slots left for this year's Evidence Week, and it's a great opportunity just to speak directly to the people who are legislating on the issues that we're working on. That said, asking you, we think researchers and scientists, there's a social responsibility to inform society, but we don't underestimate how hard that is. So we have done things like coordinate the library reform campaign, which means in the defamation law in the UK, there's protection for peer review public research. There is protection for scientists' honest opinion, not to get sued for defamation. Following the sacking of Professor David Nutt, we helped establish the scientific advice in government principles, which again means protection for independent scientific advice to government. And with Nature, we run the Maddox Prize, which recognises researchers around the world who ask those really difficult questions, often questions people don't want asked, and go to the effort of sharing that evidence public, even if it's uncomfortable evidence, even if it's results that we'd rather weren't true, standing up even though they face the challenges, and support them with that. But I think with that, I'll stop there. Apart from saying, as I said, do grab me. There's quite a lot of useful resources and conversation I'd like to share, but I'm going to stop there so we have more time to chat.
David, now we're Fiona Lethbridge from Science Media.
Can you hear that?
Sorry. Now we have Fiona Lethbridge from the Science Media Centre. So I'm trying to do two things at once, which is not my specialty.
You do very well.
Right, there we go.
You did quite well, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. And Alan, you can please shut me up if I'm speaking too long, because I might do that. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here. I'll say a little bit for a few minutes about the Science Media Centre, who we are and what we do. So we're an independent press office. We were set up specifically to improve the accuracy and quality of media reporting, not just to do PR for science and get it out there. We focus particularly on the messy, controversial, politicised topics, also big, scary breaking news stories. We're often saying to scientists that we will help the media do science better. When scientists do the media better, we can't expect the media to get things right without the help of expertise. So I'll just go through a few examples of what we do on a day-to-day basis to try and achieve our aims of ensuring accurate and evidence-based media coverage of science. So firstly, what we call rapid reactions. Secondly, roundups to new scientific studies. And finally, media briefings or press conferences. So rapid reaction is what we do when there's some sort of breaking news story. So we cover science, health, environment. So it could be any topic with a scientific aspect to it. We often say science in the headlines is an opportunity, not just a threat. This is the time that the public are actually interested in your topic and when they're listening and when they're most engaged. But because of the nature of 24/7 news media, we really need quick responses to make sure that accurate information and good experts are part of the media narrative and therefore what the public sees and hears from the off. So just one example of this from earlier this year, which was when HMPV virus made the news. So we were a bit confused and we saw headlines a bit like this. So some is HMPV the new COVID, headlines about this mystery Chinese virus, and journalists were asking us, oh my God, what is this mystery Chinese virus? Could this be the next COVID? We didn't know, we're not experts, but that's what we've got you guys for. So we go to our database and ask relevant scientists with expertise, can you comment on what's happening? What do we know? What don't we know? Help the media report this well. And I'm not expecting you to read any of this. This is just to show you what it looks like when we send things out to journalists. So we send comments like this out from experts to the science and health correspondents. We're lucky in the UK that all the main news media outlets still have the science and health specialist journalists. They're not scientists themselves, but they're used to covering science. They're used to understanding uncertainties and covering new scientific data. So if anyone's going to do a good job of covering science, it's the science and health reporters. So these were the kinds of things that the scientists were saying back to us. This is not a new virus. We've known about it for years. It's also not particularly from China, and it's usually not dangerous. So we send out these comments. We don't edit them. We don't tell scientists what to say. Scientists come back to us, give us comments about what they really think, and we send those out to journalists. And then this is what happens. So scientists, comments from scientists end up in the news media. So what the public is reading about this new scary mystery virus actually has some nice, nuanced, measured comments in it from scientists who know what they're talking about. And these are just some examples of where those comments were used, including a nice bit at the top of some of the articles highlighted there. But leading scientists say there isn't yet cause for alarm. And also the Sun. So we heard, I think, a bit yesterday about, you know, the low quality media, but the tabloids in the UK, including the Sun and the Mail, you might disagree with their political agenda, but they do still have science and health correspondents who do a good job. And a lot of the time their science coverage is as good as any of the other newspapers. This was also made it onto the kind of social media via the news media outlets. And this was a presenter reading out some of the comments that the scientists had given us that we'd sent out. So secondly, I'll talk about what we call a roundup. This is what we do when there's a new piece of science which is about to hit the news. Just to kind of illustrate how the process happens in case you don't know. So often when you'll see, you might look at the news one day and you'll see that all the news outlets have covered the same science story. And you might think, oh, that's weird. Why did they all cover it at the same time? And that's because there's a kind of process that happens between, you know, the lab bench and the newspaper. And that's that scientists do the study. Their press office, which might be the journal or the university, will do a press release about it under embargo, which means that journalists have either early access to the study in the press release. They can read it, they can write their article before it's then published the next day. That's why all the news outlets tend to cover the same story in the same day. And the bit the SMC comes in is in that embargo period when journalists are receiving this information, but before it's made public, and we want to help them report it well. So roundup is what we do to put new research into context. We get embargoed press releases from the main science and health journals, nationally and internationally. We have a look for any stories we think will be reported, are newsworthy, and might be sensationalized or misreported. And then we go to scientists and we say, this is your area of expertise. This is going to be in the news tomorrow. We think it might be misreported or hyped. Please, can you give us a written comment about it that helps put it into context for journalists? And this is just a very random example, but this was a JAMA Network Open paper looking at suicidal behavior associated with the obesity drugs. the obesity drugs are still like major news excitement fodder. So anything that's about them, they will cover. And this one obviously sounded scary. We don't know if this is good, a robust study or not. So that's why we go to our database and ask the scientists to read the study and give us a comment. And again, these are just some of the examples of the kinds of comments that scientists say, including statisticians who can kind of critique the statistical robustness of the studies. And again, independently, these scientists all basically said, this is not a trial, this is observational work. It's got significant limitations. We can't say from this study that these obesity drugs led to or caused suicidal ideation in any of these members of the public. And again, those comments were used. So while the journalists were writing their articles about this new study, they had access to these comments, fairly critiquing and analysing this new study to help them work out, is this the best thing since sliced bread, or is it more complicated and other scientists disagree with what the study shows, which in this case they did. And here again is just some examples of where the comments that we sent out were used, including some impacts on the headline about the evidence needing urgent clarification rather than drugs cause suicide. And again, across different outlets, including the tabloids. Sometimes we get feedback like this from journalists, which is interesting. So on this example, a couple of journalists came back to us and said, thanks, actually, we're probably not going to cover this because these scientists have all said it's kind of severely limited and there are caveats and it's not. Basically, that means that it isn't the story we thought it was. And therefore, for us, it doesn't kind of pass the bar as being a story. Finally, media briefings, press conferences. This is where scientists get to set the agenda, sit in front of a room full of or a Zoom full of journalists and talk about new science. So some of our briefings are news briefings on new scientific studies, and the scientists on the panel would be the scientists who've done that study, and it's their chance to explain, warts and all, with all the caveats and limitations, what their study has and hasn't found. And it's a nice opportunity for scientists and journalists to meet and get to know each other and realise that they're human beings and not terrifying. This, I think, was the last briefing we did on COVID, before it was called that, before the first lockdown. So they're not all this well attended, but this one was kind of standing room only. So again, just one quick example of this. So again, I think science, including scary aspects, when they hit the headlines, are an opportunity as well as being scary and being a threat. So this was one briefing we kind of quickly organised in April 2021 when the blood clots associated with AstraZeneca COVID vaccine were first being kind of realised and talked about. Obviously, this was a massive story. All the media were covering it, you know, rightly, but they wanted to cover it well. The journalists felt a heavy weight of responsibility on their shoulders. We wanted to help them cover it well. So we gathered together a panel of experts in vaccine safety and kind of pharmacovigilance, and also some thrombosis and blood clinician experts who'd seen some of these patients. And lots of journalists came because they had many, many questions about this. And we always think if journalists have lots of questions, the best thing is to help answer those questions from evidence and from data, being open about uncertainties. So we got these scientists on Zoom briefing and they just answered journalist questions, and they were measured and they were calm. And again, I just wanted to show this because there was talk about misinformation in the tabloids yesterday, but I just think these were lovely examples of the tabloids covering this extremely well and extremely responsibly. And I think The Sun won some award for this headline. So you can see that they're saying, yes, this is a real thing, but look at the size of the effect. It's tiny. So that's it in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis. Other things that we can maybe pick up, those of you who are coming to my group, at the end of the produce kind of recommendations based on our experiences, which include recommendation 1, which is kind of the basic one. Scientists should engage. They should be encouraged and supported, including by their institutions and their universities, to engage. If you don't speak to the media, someone else will, and that person might know less than you, and therefore the public won't get as good an idea of what the evidence shows as if you help them. So just to summarise then, if you don't speak to the media, someone else will. We would rather it was expert scientists than people who are campaigners. Media coverage and therefore public understanding will be worse without your help. There's a public good. Someone said this earlier, for scientists to get out there. I think it's part of the job of publicly funded scientists to not just do the science, but communicate it, help the public get to grips with it. See science in the headlines as an opportunity. This is when the public are listening and care about your area of research. And don't be put off or scared by misinformation. Arguably, when there's misinformation out there, even more reason for you to engage. That's when the public really need to hear from experts. And what we ought to do is to kind of dilute misinformation with good information. So I hope I've shown you a bit about the why we think you should engage and answer journalist questions and help them report it well. We and all of your institutional press offices can help with the how you do that. You don't suddenly need to go on Newsnight tomorrow. There are kind of more moderate steps you can take first. Your scientists don't feel that you have to be kind of polished or messagey. We know that the public trusts scientists, but not politicians, so don't sound like a politician. If you have the expertise, that makes you qualified. We can also help if things go wrong. It's quite rare that they do, but there's always things we can do. And there is a risk to being risk averse. That can leave a void which is filled by people who don't know what they're talking about, and we're always here to help. So that's it for me. I think I won't speak any longer. Thank you.
So it's great to be here. My name is Carrie Heitmeyer. I am head of social science in the Government Office for Science. And just to give you a little bit more, start out with a bit of information about what Government Office for Science does. We are an organization. We sit within the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, also known as DSIT, but we report to the Chief Scientific Advisor, who that's currently Dame Professor Angela McLean, who some of you may know. And our sort of broader mission is to champion the use of science and evidence within government. So there's a number of different roles that we play. We coordinate areas of research interest for government departments, and also notably we have a network of chief scientific advisors. So each department, or most departments, will have their own department or chief scientific advisor that works at that departmental level. And then we, within the sort of broader emergency preparedness and resilience sphere, we also play a significant role around coordinating interdisciplinary science for crisis response. So in that, you're probably very familiar with SAGE, so that's probably what we're sort of known for most in terms of emergency and crisis response. And this slide here sort of just gives you an illustration of how SAGE fits into the broader, sort of feeds into science advice to the wider mechanism. So on the left here, you have COBRA, which is the Cabinet Office briefing room. So essentially the main mechanism, decision-making mechanism during a crisis, and various different forms of evidence and data that feed into that sort of decision-making and crisis response. And on sort of the four sort of sections at the bottom include science and technical advice, and that's where we come in. So that's the SAGE secretary. That's SAGE. So that's a group of independent scientists chaired by the chief scientific advisor, and then are supported by the SAGE secretariat. So that's a group of civil servants that help coordinate and support the science, both the sort of science meetings, but also all of the work around translation and feeding into policy teams that happens more sort of in the background. So again, you can see, I don't know how clear it is, but this is from the SAGE guidance that you can find online. The SAGE committee provides direction, coordinates advice, validates and review the work of the subgroups and policy options, and liaises with COBRA and have activated STAC. So those are the science and technology action committees. I think that's at the sort of a local level. In addition to SAGE, depending on the level of the crisis, you will also have subgroups. So my work, I joined Go Science in 2020 to work with the Secretariat for SPIBE. So that is the behavioral subgroup that supports SAGE. And then there were other subgroups, SPIAM, NerveTag, and then there's others depending on the crisis. So just a little bit more about my role. So I, as head of social science, a significant part of what we do is is around the social and behavioral science component. So again, working with a sort of broader group of interdisciplinary sciences. We coordinate within government the social sort of societal and behavioral dimensions. We set up in 2023 a new internal group to government called the Social and Behavioral Science for Emergency Steering Group. This was set up originally when Patrick Ballance was still in his role as Chief Scientific Advisor and National Statistician Ian Diamond, to provide strategic coordination for cross-government social and behavioral science advice to prepare for and respond to rapid requests for science advice. So again, we do work both in terms of the sort of business as usual preparedness, as well as being able to mobilize across government, excuse me, the right internal expertise, again, to respond to that particular, the sort of specific questions that come up. There are some examples here in terms of some of the topics that we've worked on in the past. More recently, we've worked closely with Cabinet Office as part of the recently published Resilience Action Plan to provide guidance for risk owners in departments around social vulnerability. So to help when considering the reasonable worst case scenario, to help risk owners think about which groups are most vulnerable. So both in terms of exacerbating existing inequalities, but also thinking about new forms of vulnerability that evolve within a crisis, including both sort of primary and secondary impacts. And then a piece of work that we're doing right now with academics from the Behavioral Research UK network is around developing a very rapid piece of work to develop advice on public messaging for concurrent risks for the summer weather. So thinking about current scenario where we have extreme heat, drought, and wildfires, how does government effectively provide guidance and messaging and engagement with the public? So I think I will stop here. I have a number of prompt questions, but those are probably best for the working group, if that's okay with the organizers.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. Lovely. And before we split up, the last panelist is Josephine Adekola from the University of Glasgow, and who's going to talk to us about her lessons from COVID-19 research. Over to you, Josephine.
So thank you so much, Dylan, for inviting me. So I'm very pleased to be here. So I'm Josephine Adekola from the Adam Smith Business School in Glasgow. So I'm a pure scientist from the management department. So you can imagine what the conference has been for me since yesterday. So quickly, I've just got 5 minutes, so I'm going to try to run through my research, which I've done on COVID, to understand why certain communities were kind of not interested in taking up the vaccines. So I became interested in researching COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy, following the news that some communities, and that includes the African, Caribbean, and Black communities, weren't taking up the vaccines. I was very curious and really a little bit very curious, because the news at that point were suggesting that some of the health workers that were dying were from the community, were from the Black Asian community. But now the vaccine is out and they're the ones now refusing to take the vaccine. So it didn't make sense to me. So I began to research into it because, number one, I was curious. I was a member of the community and I felt that it should be an honor for me to take on the research. So I did 3 research. I think I carried out 3 research from between 2021 and 2023. In altogether, it involved 10 community engagement events, hundreds and hundreds of interviews and survey, and some of the publications you can see there. But yeah, I just got 5 minutes. I'm going to dive straight into the results. So the first research was a survey and a few interviews. The second one was interviews and focus group. But the third one, I produced kind of a documentary. So if you're interested in kind of seeing the original research, there's a documentary called COVID-19 Vaccine Debate, if you're interested in seeing that. But to summarize the findings, there are three key main findings. I will categorize everything that was discussed. The first one was on vaccine-related issues, and community members, specifically the minority ethnic communities, were concerned about the efficacy, the efficiency of vaccines. I know most of you are more interested in producing your vaccine and how it's replicated or used in other ways. But when those vaccine comes out of the laboratory, it's not just accepted by communities. There are so many issues that the communities have to deal with in deciding whether to take the vaccines or not. So people were concerned about the efficiency, the efficacy. People still got the virus anyway, despite taking the vaccines. There were concerns around the speed of the development of the vaccines at that point. And also there were debates, scientific debate around side effects, blood clots that were, of concern to people. And people were worried that some of the side effects that they had weren't really explained, which showing signs of hesitancy across the different doses, because people who came to take the first dose of the COVID vaccine weren't coming to take the second one, weren't coming to take the third one. And some of the reasoning for that is that the doctors couldn't really explain to them the side effect they experience. And if it's not on the list written by the government, you're completely dismissed as, it's your problem. Now, the second issue relates to information-related issue. Now, the first thing you need to understand is that most migrant communities get information from multiple sources. So they get information from their home country. They also get information from their host country. So they have different information from different countries, most times conflicting, in fact, that makes them, that kind of complicates the information climate for them. And we can see what social media is doing around misinformation, fake news. A lot of people were sharing fake news without putting a label to it to see if this was a fake news or not. And the reason why this fake news was very potent was because we were dealing with trusted sources. So if your mom sends you a message about potential problems with a particular vaccine, you'll likely believe her. Because on everyday basis, you believe her because you know she loves you, she cares for you. And if she tells you something, if she tells you there's milk in the fridge, there's always milk in the fridge. If she tells you that there's chicken in the oven, there's always chicken in the oven. So if your mom is telling you that this vaccine is risky, you're likely to believe her, even if you're a scientist. So we're dealing with a situation of trusted sources, someone who love and care for you. And we also had credible sources, which are often untrusted, which kind of leads me to the third point, which I will go into in a moment. Let me just go into the third point. So the third point, which was rather surprising, especially in the third study, was around how society treated people. People didn't want to take the vaccine due to discriminatory practices and racism. One of the participants was describing how she had an issue with the Home Office. So the Home Office stopped her from working for 10 years, as at the point we were having the community engagement. And what she thought was that if a country can stop her from working, it means that they wanted her to die in the first place. Because as a family woman with no job at all, it means she could have died. The same authority is now turning around, asking her to take a vaccine. It didn't make sense to her. Another person was talking about how she experienced discrimination in the workplace, and these have been swept under the carpet. In the best case scenario is that the perpetrator is moved to another department and you're being dismissed. So what we are seeing is that community members aren't trusting authorities in everyday society. So that was having implication on how they trusted public messaging from authority. And one of the things my study found out was that most of the public health, bears the consequences of some of the societal discrimination that we see, because people are not really able to separate what was happening in the policing system. At that point, it was the George Floyd period where we had this massive protest around the world around how, the leg on the neck and how people from the Black communities are treated really badly. So that was happening at the same time, and people are not really able to separate the police from health. All they see is the authorities, and the authorities were entrusted, and we had trusted sources of information who were worried about conspiracy, fake news, and all that. Now, the framework you see here, which I want us to think about when we go into our interactive session, is that when we communicate about public health messaging, there's so much more going through people's mind. So it's not just the credibility of the information. It's not the data of the vaccines that we've been looking at since yesterday. There are other issues that are more important to people than the vaccine itself. So science itself is not the only issue at stake. There are issue of trust, there are issue of credibility, there are issue of do you even like me? You know, you're telling me to take a vaccine when I know you don't even like me. I know you don't care for me. I know you don't see me, yet you're the one asking me to take the vaccine. So there are a lot of issues there. And if you look at towards the other part of the the slide, people are asking questions around the science itself, so the evidence, the information, disinformation, but there are deep core issues around the trust in system, the messaging, the sources of authority, you know, public perception. You know, we even have the hostile environment policy where, you know, migrant community are being treated so harshly. The ultimate aim on wanting them to leave the country. I know there are political debates around immigration, and I'm not going to go into that, but that doesn't really help when we have a public health crisis, because we're seeing situations where people from the refugee, my time is up? Okay, okay. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Josephine. Okay, I'm just going to pop the reminder back up. Okay, so the front here, that's Group A with David and me. We're going to go that direction now. Group B is those back tables there. So that's Fiona and who do we say? And James?
No, sorry.
No, sorry, Paul. Sorry, Paul. Group C is Carrie and Hayley. You guys are going to stay in here because Carrie's going to be up on this screen. And then Group D, these tables here, that's Josephine and James, and you're also going to come out there. So if we can, so we're a little bit behind schedule. So I reckon if we try and get back in here for 12:25, I think that would be a good thing. Hopefully everyone enjoyed that. We're running a little bit over time, so I thought what we could try and do is very quickly get some feedback from the individual groups, just like 1, maybe 2 minutes from each of the groups, and that will give us some time to have a general Q&A with the panelists who are now set up front. So I can feedback from Group A with David from Sense About Science, so I can do that quickly. I mean, we talked, actually, it was a really fascinating discussion about uncertainty in science and how to communicate uncertainty, and maybe like some of us in the more science community would find that very difficult to communicate and then, you know, and change our mind during the course of a pandemic, right? And how we would feel about slowly moving to a new line based on new evidence and not wanting to appear that we you know, quote unquote changed our mind. So we had quite a lot of conversations on that, which I thought were really interesting, and I think there's definitely some divisions in the group about how the best way to do that would be. Group B with Fiona, I think, are you happy to just quickly?
I can do, and anyone who is in my group, feel free to stick your hand up and disagree with me, and sorry if I don't fairly represent what we talked about, but we also addressed that and the uncertainty aspect, and especially in such early stages of the pandemic. I mean, one of the things that we talked about in the scenario was the case fatality rate seeming terrifying, but then it was pointed out that actually 2 weeks into anything, that's probably wrong. That's probably not yet right. And so the importance of anyone who's talking about these numbers being open about the fact that it's uncertain and it might well change. And yes, to avoid the accusation later down the road of, you know, U-turning or getting it wrong, the importance of being open about uncertainties from the outset, because things will change as evidence comes in. We talked about the importance of lots of scientists kind of coming forward, partly because some scientists are restricted if they are actual government scientists and can't always talk openly. That means that we need others to step up so as to not leave a void. Another thing we talked about was the frustration I think that lots of people had, that some voices and faces who were all over the place during the COVID who weren't actually relevant experts. So this thing about scientists staying in their lanes and talking about their own expertise and not putting themselves in a camp or becoming campaigners or becoming ideological about issues, but to not leave a void that's filled by those people needs people of all sorts. And we identified, you know, modelers, epidemiologists, virologists, kind of hospital leaders, vaccine experts, all to be out there answering questions about their specific area, so that we don't leave this void which will be filled by others. And then finally, just there was also talk about having, you know, networks like UK-ICN or, you know, organisations like the Microbiology Society offering kind of support and also maybe sharing information and sharing knowledge to make lots of other scientists feel like, oh yeah, I could answer that question because I know, because I've spoken to whoever. And then finally, the reminder to not focus on or get sidetracked or get too depressed about small groups of people out there whose minds are made up and will never change their minds, whether that's about vaccination or staying in their houses or whatever it is. Don't let the existence of those people put you off engaging at all, because actually most people out there, the vast majority of the public, are sensible and want to do the right thing and are open-minded and just want to hear about experts and from evidence. So don't let the existence of a small number of people whose minds will never be changed stop you from talking to this larger group whose minds will be changed by good evidence. Anyone else want to feedback from my group if I've butchered things? Or you can also comment, I'm sure, in the next bit.
Okay, Group C, that's Max.
Yeah. So I'm reporting back from the policy engagement, so translating science to policy and how to essentially get in contact with the government. And we've discussed a wealth of things, and it kind of starts from the bottom up. So you can get in contact with local groups and government and responders. That's kind of your first starting point. So things, I suppose, as obvious as students moving across countries, returning to university or the end of school holidays, how that might affect local spread of disease. And so universities can get in contact with the local government, that can then feed up. But there's obviously also more centralized department level departments that can be contacted, and they normally are headed by a scientific advisor. But within those departments, you normally also find working groups that, I suppose, feed back between the head and the working groups of the departments. And when the I suppose contact is happening, there's a couple of options how this might work. So it could be a direct invitation as a like targeted specialist almost, but equally you could recommend, if you feel like you have something to say, you can also recommend yourself. Another really important point there was raised about making your net work, because you don't of research connections across the globe, and that can be really important to bring these people into contact with the policymakers as well. So I suppose that leads on to the next kind of point, is how to effectively then communicate with the policymakers. And a very important point that's raised about being transparent as possible and also maintaining diversity of thought within these expert groups, which kind of was suggested that this might be achieved by appropriate or balanced levels of challenge within those groups of opinions, and kind of self-reflection on how do we know that we got it. And when there is uncertainty about what you got right, attaching things such as Julian mentioned, certainty scales. So how likely, what is our confidence in this scenario sort of very unlikely to very likely. The other thing is, when reporting uncertainty scales and particularly numbers, it was raised that, I suppose, using numerical reporting on evidence for us is commonplace, but it is not necessarily for everyone. So making kind of numbers as easily accessible as possible was raised as a very important factor in communicating.
Can I jump in very
Yeah,
quickly?
please.
One point, just to say on numbers, research shows people really like numbers. When you're talking about risk and uncertainty, people really prefer numbers to people using broad terms like high and low, because who the hell knows what that actually means. So, you know, there've been really good studies on it. So I agree, clarify, simplify numbers, but don't shy away from actually using them. It's good data.
Perfect. Does anyone else want to add from our group? No?
Brilliant. Thanks, Max.
Thanks, Max. And then the final group, Group D.
Yeah.
Hi.
I think our group was focused on like community and public messaging around it. Does it still work? Okay, yeah. So we spoke a bit about how do we ensure we've learnt the lessons from COVID-19 pandemic, and we had questions raised about how accessible the COVID-19 inquiry is to the public in the UK, and how that might differ between inquiries taking place in other countries, and can lessons be learnt across those communities as well. I mean, most of us in our conversation felt like lessons hadn't particularly been learnt yet, and if the next pandemic happens anytime soon, we'd still be in the same position as we were in 2020. We also spoke about how potentially we could have had like MPIs enacted earlier, and kind of leaned into like the political decisions that were being made, and how we try and make sure as a scientific community that we can avoid like strict MPIs like lockdowns if we acted earlier, doing other things first. We also spoke about public health messaging and trying to make sure that there are local approaches as well, rather than just sort of top-down national like government office bulletins that are happening every night. And kind of related to that is making sure that with government change and everything like that, that funding and logistical empowerment is still being maintained, so that people mainly interact with their healthcare workers in their local setting. And so you can use those community connections to kind of like first access trusted messengers into different communities that are hard to reach. Change forever as we go along, and not necessarily a bad thing. So downsides or potential upsides of using celebrity ambassadors. And that led to conversations about how there won't be one communication method that will work for all. And so to tailor it to different communities using trusted messengers. And then Josephine made a really, a point that resonated with me quite a lot, was like how asking someone to trust you is not necessarily a safe thing to do. Because I can't remember how you put it. But if you ask someone to trust you, it's kind of, you may then not act in their best interest further down the line, so then you lose the trust very quickly. And so you mentioned shared understanding might be a better platform to work from instead, rather than trust or mistrust. And then how we might influence the decisions of leaders, which I think is what your group were talking about. And then finally, a point was made that scientists should be more practiced in communicating their science to the general public at all different levels, and just have that built into our kind of way of working as well.
So just to add to her point, I think the conversation, we ended up with more questions than we went into. We started with a challenge to the way it was framed, that we call it SARS-CoV-3, that is problematic in itself, and that will plunge us straight back into the COVID scenario like we had already. And we ended up with a question of AI. So one thing that is different now from when COVID-19 hit was AI. And we couldn't even start the debate around AI and how that will be problematic within the risk communication climate. So that's us.
Okay, I think that's some fantastic feedback, and there's some really sort of a lot of similar themes coming up across the various groups, which is interesting. I mean, we're supposed to finish now. I really want to maybe just give anyone an opportunity to ask any last questions of the panelists, but then I think it would be nice to just get a closing remark from each of the panelists as well. So if anyone's got any questions before the panelists close with their remarks. Got one here from Fred.
So in your opinion, what would be the best approach to gain that trust from the public? Like being, we said not asking for trust, but like what's the most successful way in your opinion to just get that?
There's good research on it. I like David Spiegelhalter is a good person to quote on this. It's don't look for trust, be trustworthy. So it's about everything you do up to the point where you make that conversation. So it is about being consistent. It's not about cutting corners when you're trying to be persuasive and then you suddenly lose the caveats. It's hard work. It's a full-time job. But if you're trustworthy, then people will trust you at the time. If you come out of nowhere and you've always focused on the agenda, then why would they trust you? So
and to add to that, trust will come over time, because we are in a state where the public is in an emotional state, depending on the community you belong to, and depends on how the society treats you. If the society treats you better, you're likely to be in a better state than if the society treats you worse. So what we should be looking for is having a shared understanding, and that's what communication is about anyway. So communication is simply the exchange of information between two or more people with the ultimate goal of having a shared understanding. So as long as you're doing the whole process well with credibility, consistency, the decision to trust is with the trustor. But I think, like she did say, that it would be wrong for us to ask somebody to trust, because trust is asking somebody to rely on your decision with the hope that I will make the best decision for that person. But in reality, I can't make the best decision for you, even if I want to, because there's issues around conflict of interest, there are political issues there are structural issues there that may stop me from doing that. So I can ask you to trust me, because that's dangerous. It's a dangerous behavior, right? But what I can do, we can at least try to achieve a shared understanding based on the data, the information, and whether you trust or not is left to the recipient of the information.
I was going to use the same David Spiegelhalter quote as David did about being trustworthy. But yeah, I think we know from even very recent data in the UK that scientists, professors are very highly trusted. I think the question that is asked is, do you trust this list of people or professions to tell the truth? So I think that means that you should tell the truth. That's what the public expects you to do. I think we know some things about why they don't trust people like politicians as much. They come across, well, we all know how they come across, kind of polished and soundbitey and not genuine. Whereas I think scientists often, when they're talking about from evidence and about their own area of expertise, can talk about data and can talk about evidence and can be open about uncertainties. So I think it comes back to saying, answering journalists and the public's questions, being open and honest when it's your area of expertise, not shying away from uncertainties, and talking about evidence, which is, I guess, on the way to getting to the truth.
And Carrie, I could see you wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, just taking my sort of government hat off and more from a sort of social science perspective. I mean, there's a huge amount of social science literature around, the importance of moving away from a sort of knowledge deficit model in terms of just top-down approaches to sharing information, to really sort of thinking about engagement and co-production and the importance of those types of more, again, I think less top-down mechanisms for gaining trust and really sort of getting people on board. And also, I think, through that process, getting better input into interventions or sort of broader processes in general.
Thank you, Carrie. Julian.
One sus- So we have got in this fast-moving information 0 time to inform and educate, work with whatever communities in that 100-day mission. To stop that outbreak being pandemic. And I would argue sometimes we don't have the luxury to do that. So in our group, we talk about the analogy of the car. My car breaks down, I take it to the garage, the mechanic fixes it, I get back in the car and I drive it. I don't argue with the mechanic with what they've done and why they've done it.
But you do occasionally.
I'm really double. And I'm just wondering then, when you've got like the chief medical officer, who is the most informed person, let's say, in the land because of the pathways that have gone to them saying, get a vaccine, what else can you do? And I'll go to what Nick has reflected to me, actually, maybe then the solution is that you engage with the communities, all communities, prior to that outbreak, prior to that pandemic, and you do that better. Because in the next pandemic outbreak, we're not going to have that time. We're not going to have the luxury that we did during COVID. Because it's 100 days or plus now.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, maybe I can ask the panelists to each address Julian's point in their closing remarks. And Carrie, could we start with you online if that's okay?
Do you mind just the sound sort of came in and out.
Okay.
It was around the point of the extent to which people, non-experts, can grasp the sort of technical elements of the, is that sort of broadly?
I think Julian was sort of stressing the timeliness of decision making in the first 100 days of a pandemic. Do we have time to consult that broadly? We need to engage earlier and then make decisions very quickly. But yeah, if you could perhaps encapsulate a response to that with your closing remarks, then I'll go on to the other panelists after you, or I can come back to you.
I think I would agree with Julian's point in terms of the broader engagement. You sort of start in terms of the starting point. You do need to have a sort of broader engagement plan that is sort of already in place to then be able to sort of act very quickly within an actual response. I will leave it there if that's okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in response to that point, I think it follows on from that trust. Yes, you want to engage with the people so that, you want to, it's the same with everything. If you want somebody to do something for you, if you want something, you want to have a relationship with them. So engaging early makes sense. I think in terms of just the 100 days, I think the analogy for me is, you explain to your children why they shouldn't walk out across the road because they need to make good decisions. But if they step out in front of the car, you will grab them and you'll pull them and you will not negotiate. And I think it's similar in a pandemic. Enforcing rules in the first week to save life makes sense. Having those rules in place without negotiation after 100 days, after 6 months, or having a cheesy slogan doesn't cut it. So that also links back to that conversation about being open about uncertainty, making space for things to evolve and move. Because what I think COVID showed us, people had a huge amount of trust. That lockdown, I walked through London like on that last week in March. I could walk across the city with the blindfold and not be hit by, not that I suggest that, but that was trust. That was people following it, and it was lost over time because it was taken for granted. In terms of closing remarks, what I think it's been really interesting. What I would ask, I think, or suggest is the most useful thing for me would be is for you to go away and decide about what your role is going to be in the future. And again, that's allowed to change over time. But think about what where could you contribute, and just as clearly where you can't. You're going to be massively frustrated next time at all the things that our politicians are doing wrong, other people are doing wrong. You can't fix it all, but think about where you can contribute. And if you're an ECR, or even if you're not, I really suggest do join our Voice of Young Science network. We do free workshops. We've got loads of resources. This is great. It's free online to think about, and that'll help you explore what it's like to engage with the public, or engage with the media, or engage with the policymakers, and decide if any of those are for you, or where you are, or whether you will sit in that team, whether your role is to sit in that research team and there's somebody else in your department who does that. With that in mind, if you want to engage with the public, and I'm thinking maybe you're doing really experimental research that requires social license. If you're going to do something, you know, you're going to genetically modify stuff and you want people to put it in their arm, you're going to have a conversation about that now, not say, trust me when it rolls out. So if you want that social license, come and talk to us about public engagement. We do lots of partnerships. We can support you in developing that. If you're thinking about the media, talk to Science Media Centre, because they're brilliant. And if you're thinking about policymakers, again, if you think your work is at that stage in your department, your team, where actually you think this should be influencing policy, again, please grab me. Evidence Week is a brilliant place to come into Parliament, and we get you one-to-one conversations with MPs and other people and department heads to say this is what you need to know, and brief them on it. So again, grab me. But there's all those opportunities out there. But I think the first thing is deciding where you can fit in and where you want to fit in.
Thank you, David and Josephine.
Okay, yeah. So I think I agree with him. We need to, engage with the community right now. We don't have to wait for another pandemic to happen. Like in crisis management, we have 3 phases. We have the pre-pandemic phase, the pandemic, and the post-pandemic. I want to believe with the inquiry out of the way, we are beyond the post-pandemic of COVID, and we are now in the new pre-pandemic state. And we need to activate all the necessary communication and engagement practices that are required, including engaging with community leaders, etc. We don't leave it to when the pandemic has come. But my closing remark, as I'm sitting here facing a lot of scientists, one message is that science alone is not the only issue at stake. So to put it in the context of vaccine alone is not the only issue at stake. There are historical issues that shapes if someone wants to take a vaccine or not. People have been mistreated in vaccine production. Certain communities have been victimized. So we need to think about these things when we are producing our vaccine. Understand the historical context of the community your vaccine is targeting. Even if it's the general population, then you need to understand the historical context of the different community who are going to, receive the vaccine you're producing. Be interested in that, not just the technical aspect of vaccine production, because it does affect if people accept your vaccine or not. Yes, with that, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Josephine and Fiona.
Thank you. I think in response to Julian's point, I actually think that quite a lot of people did see the mechanic. They did treat the scientist or the expert like you did the mechanic. Yes, of course. I imagine you would have asked your mechanic, tell me what you did, what was it what was broken, what did you need to fix? You might ask those questions, and I think that's fine. But I think a lot of people, we did quite well with vaccination rates in the UK, didn't we? So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't despair too much. And I think we did pretty well because there were plenty of scientists who were out there being open and answering journalist questions and talking about evidence and uncertainties. So I think in the UK, we're very lucky. We've got a public and a media that's very amenable, that very open. There's an appetite there. They want to hear from scientists. They want to hear from experts. So the appetite is there. So let's make sure that we kind of fill it and feed it by getting scientists out there, answering media and public questions, talking about their areas of research. And again, I think maybe with the mechanic thing as well, don't be put off by those small groups of people whose minds won't be changed. And it's not your job actually to change minds anyway. So remember that there's the mass public out there who have an open mind, want to hear about evidence and want to hear from experts. If you see misinformation, that's when we need you more to dilute that misinformation with accurate information. So please, hopefully a lot of you will see it as part of your job as a scientist to communicate. And if you are interested in speaking with the media, either now or in the future, then please email me or come and speak to me. And we'd love some more of you to join our expert database.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay, I think we can just about close for lunch, but I think what I'd really like us all to do is thank all the panelists for taking the time out of their busy days to come and speak to us about this. And I hope we've all learned a little bit about communication in the face of a pandemic. So thank you all. Thanks very much.